Hey everyone, welcome to Red Lion Learning. Today we're talking about mid-cap companies and how GDPR affects them. Let's go. Josh, what are your thoughts on GDPR?
Well, GDPR, or the General Data Privacy Regulation, Protection Regulation, I can never remember, are all about consumer privacy. And it's all about protecting your data as a consumer of all these companies that take your data. Now, it also mandates how they process, collect, store, fold, spindle, and mutilate all that data. So it's really kind of important considering Cambridge Analytica, Facebook's general, let's just say, not the best way of using our data, collecting our data, storing our data. The fact that our license plates are collected 3 times a day, our personal data is collected by a few large companies. I mean, how many of you have said, my life is owned by Google? Okay. GDPR is kind of important, and we're seeing that come around in a lot of ways. So, Melissa, have you experienced anything in GDPR land or anything about GDPR in the last few months?
It is definitely a hot topic with us. I know that there are quite a few companies that are afraid of the letters GDPR, and mostly because they don't understand what it means.
Well, what does it mean?
Yeah, well, they hear that it's going to be $1 million. Oh my God, what do I do? I know. I'm going to bury my head in the sand and hope it goes away.
I was literally about to make that comment.
You see it a lot, man. How many times have we talked to a company? It's like, we should talk about GDPR. And we go, okay, it involves X, Y, and Z. We need to do various phases and steps of assessment and remediation and then checking it over again. They go, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's not like just a questionnaire?
No.
Like, no.
Right, but why does this matter to mid-cap companies? I mean, mid-cap companies usually, when you're working with one, when you find them, they say, well, the rules really don't apply to us.
Why not?
Let's try that again. Why does this matter to mid-cap companies?
It depends. If they're a B2B company or a business-to-business company, it may not apply to them that much. If they're not storing actual people's data, not just medical data, but personal data, your name, your address, your phone number, something I can individuate back to Melissa, back to Scott, back to Josh.
So you're saying PII?
Well, PII, but GDPR has its own very expanded definition of PII because, and then there's also the offshoots of it, like CCPA, we'll talk about that in another video. But the idea is that if you can't individuate the person, PII, exactly as you said, then it's not really worrisome for GDPR stuff or for GDPR world or whatever you want to call it. But if you're a B2C company, a business to consumer, for example, let's see, Facebook, Google for their personal offerings, Slack for all the ones that aren't enterprise Slack. There's a million B2C companies out there. Banggood to buy your Chinese whatevers that you're buying, and I think I just bought a flashlight off them, so I really shouldn't talk. And every kind of company that sells to a consumer, Amazon is a huge one, for example. They are collecting data. I mean, Melissa, you've got an Amazon account, I'm sure, Amazon Prime?
Of course.
Of course I've got an Amazon Prime account. What do you think I am?
First world problems right there.
But I mean, what data does Amazon know about you?
Well, it's under my husband, so I don't know about me.
Right. But unfortunately, all the companies that you've talked about, Facebook, Banggood, Amazon, those are large market cap companies, right?
They are, yes.
What about the mids?
Well, just because you're a mid-cap company doesn't mean you don't collect personal data.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, good Lord, what's the company that made Angry Birds? For a long time, they were a mid-cap company. What about the company? And they collected data just as surely as any schlub that builds an app and sells it on the iFart app, which made millions of dollars, absolutely collected some personal data or was able to collect some personal data because you bought it in the App Store. So that's a mid-cap company. They may be $1 million, $10 million, $100 million. Also, of course, there's the definition of what is a mid-cap company.
Right.
So it gets awkward. According to the Small Business Administration, if you have 2,000 employees, you're a small business. Did you know that?
Right. So if you are a business in Europe right, and you're collecting data, then GDPR applies to you whether you're small, mid, or large. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, there's a few qualifications, but off the bat, that's a good rule of thumb, yes.
Okay. And so have we seen mid-cap companies start to get smacked with GDPR fines?
I have not seen that much of it. As a matter of fact, Google got smacked with their first GDPR fine, and it was so incredibly huge, $57 million, which for Google is the money they make now. You know, like, guys, come on. It's not really, GDPR was supposed to be dissuasive. It was supposed to be, you screw up with people's data, we're going to smack you hard enough you're going to feel it. It was 2 to 4% of global annual turnover.
Right.
But 57 million, it's global turnover before 11s.
But is that 57 million, was that such a shock because it was the amount, or because that was the first fine that was issued?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't remember if it was the very first fine that was issued. It was definitely one of the first, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But
So was it a shock, like I said, was it a shock that it was actually, that GDPR is being enforced? Or was it the shock, the sticker shock of the, 57 million?
Honestly, these days, the fact that there's a compliance regime that is getting enforced and they're actually cracking the whip and handing out some fines is unusual. We're seeing a lot of compliance regimes that are, we're going to do good by we're going to smack the wrongdoers, and they're not smacking anybody. So who cares? It's very difficult when you see, how many doctors' offices are there that are not doing HIPAA properly, and they haven't been audited. HHS is ramping up auditing like crazy, but they can't get around to everybody. So there's doctors out there going, well, we'll see if we can get by for a few more years before we got to spend the money, and GDPR is exactly the same thing. Well, GDPR, there's a million mid-cap companies. They're going to go after the big guys first. I've got a few years yet. Yeah. No, come on, man. Eventually they're going to come around. And when they do, 57 million to Google is, nothing. To you, that might be a few years of your income.
Hey, thanks for joining us today with Red Lion Learning. We were talking about GDPR and how it affects mid-cap companies, what we're seeing in the market with how really GDPR is playing out. Be sure to hit like and subscribe in the channel, watch for future updates, and if you want, reach out. We're always open. Thanks.